transgenderism is getting out of control in terms of its ideology and the sort of rooting of moral progressivism and complete relativism, and we've lost total sense of any kind of grounding in anything that makes sense in terms of our humanity. And the contradictions are going to continue to emerge, and a lot of these sort of ridiculous sort of necessary conclusions of a particular argument within relativism will emerge, and so the whole thing will kind of implode on itself. But we want to be able to at least make sense of it while it's happening, and try to maintain some sense of calm and some sense of understanding here, some sense of order, and not feel like we're all going insane. And so here's what I'm starting to see, and I think may make a little bit of sense of some of this while we're in it. And it always makes a lot more sense afterwards when we look back in hindsight. But I think just to put it really succinctly, we had the sexual revolution of the 60s reacting to sexual repression. And in a lot of ways, sexual revolution was truthful. There's a goodness to the experience of our sexuality that should be elevated. Obviously, it was unhinged and ungrounded from anything that is truly human, or in the personal sphere of our human dignity or human excellence. And so it was ungrounded from and unhinged from any kind of discipline or self-mastery. And so then pleasure becomes the ultimate good, and then even using other people mutually for pleasure, as long as there's some kind of contract of mutual acceptance, becomes the norm. Well, obviously that can't sustain itself. There's not an intrinsic, implicit fruitfulness to sexual pleasure. And so there's an end that it doesn't keep going in itself. You see, our sexuality is built for procreation, for fruitfulness, for fertility, bodily and spiritually. We come out of ourselves, and there's an ongoing life-giving process that this is what over time will never be satiated. It will continue on forever, and ultimately brings us into eternity, which never ends. So, not to get too metaphysical or spiritual here, but to just kind of bring it back down to this world, what's happening is we're trying to use a vehicle that brings us to eternity, but we're making it stop short at something in this world that is very finite, the experience of pleasure. And so what ends up happening is there's this drive towards finding new sort of articulations, expressions of what that unhinged sort of undisciplined seeking of pleasure can order towards. Long story short, so let's just cover like 5 decades in a sentence here. We end up at a real sort of problem with pornography. And so pornography is this on-demand, immediate gratification, constant sort of nurturing of self and self-pleasure without any kind of undisciplined sense of love or sexuality. So that's what's happened over the last 50, 60, 70 years. And at the same time, we've lost sight of the fact that our sexuality is something that is drawing us out of ourselves towards another. So there's 2 dimensions. Not only is self-mastery lost, but the coming out of self towards another that's very different from us, that is implied in the male-female relationship, has also been lost. And so there's this, the need, as sexuality has been inscribed within us, is that we come out of ourselves to find something that we don't have within us. We are attracted towards, we have desire towards the other, to be satisfied, to be fulfilled, to be completed in someone who has something that I don't have within myself. Sort of the basis for desire. When I desire something, it's because I don't have it. And so I'm coming out of myself to go looking for, to acquire something I don't have already. And at the deepest level, it's the deepest level of ourself and our identity that we need to go out towards the other. So we can understand here how along the path of this sort of seeking for this undisciplined, unhinged, non-mastery of self experience of pleasure, then homosexuality enters into the picture. It is a manifestation of some level of personal relationship still between two people, but without that experience of going out towards someone of a totally different experience of humanity, the otherness of somebody of the opposite sex. And so that has happened along the way. It requires less of a sacrifice of self, of an understanding of another. It's actually a different level of still another person, still requires being in the world of another person who's not you, but as long as it's somebody of the same gender, there's still something less than what could be found in somebody who is entirely other. So that is also part of this moving out of self as God has inscribed it in us, as we find in our biology, which is validated and confirmed in our fertility. Fertility only works when we are experiencing our sexuality within the context of opposite sex relationships. That's what gives life to our entire human species. So biology itself is validating the necessity of the otherness of the sexual engagement, and we've cut that out as well. So not only have we cut out self-mastery, we've also cut out the gift of self towards another of the opposite sex. And so now we've entered into this place with total self-focus, not other-focused, and it's all about me, it's all about I, it's all about the egotistical complete overemphasis on selfishness in that way. Well, it seems to be the case, and here's my sort of idea that I'm proposing here, that nature will evolve, that there is a survival instinct within even our social sense of our experience in our humanity. And so I think that what we're seeing here within this idea of transgenderism is a mutation of our humanity, a distorted kind of evolution that's happening on the social level, because something in us is telling us that complementarity is necessary. Something in the zeitgeist of our humanity, our experience, our social, cultural environment, something in us is reacting to that in the environment that wants there to be an other. There wants there to be complementarity. There wants there to be a difference. And if we're not going to be validating the necessity of difference externally between two people, why not validate the necessity of difference internally so I can change myself into the other? If we're not going to validate that necessity as a culture, then we're going to overcome whatever limitations there are, even of our own biology, to validate and proclaim loudly the truth of the need for an other. And that is what's happening with transgenderism, that somebody can change into the other because society is not providing the truth that we need the other.